You're standing right there at the gas pump, just trying to fill up your tank, when suddenly, that number on the screen jumps. We are talking another 50 cents per gallon, and that is just within this month alone. Now, you see, that isn't just a string of bad luck. That is a system at work. Here is the real kicker. That price hike is tied directly to a dirty little secret about American gasoline. And it is exactly why the United States straight up moved to arrest Nicolás Maduro.
Now, he is not just some nobody. He is the sitting president of Venezuela. The man who controls one of the absolute richest heavy oil supplies on the planet. Just nabbed in last week's bombshell U.S. operation.
Bottom line, America pumps more oil than any other country on the whole planet. Believe it or not, we are the absolute top dog in production. But you see, here's the paradox. We are literally drowning in oil, yet we are starving for the right kind. Our rigs are churning out light, sweet shale oil. It is clean, modern, and believe it or not, it is actually pretty easy to extract. But those massive refineries down on the Gulf Coast, in places like Texas and Louisiana, well, they have a major problem. They are basically ancient beasts built decades ago. And the truth is, they do not even want that clean, light oil. They were engineered for heavy, sour, crude. It is thick, it is dirty, and it is basically like liquid tea or exactly the kind of oil Venezuela has in spades.
Now look, here's where it hits your wallet. Believe it or not, roughly 70% of those refineries are basically just idling right now. They're choking without Maduro's oil flow. And you see, that mismatch alone is jacking up your gas prices by 20%.
It is a double-edged sword, really. We have plenty of oil, but it is just the wrong damn type. Dike, Dutuk Sulam Ot Kondau, Hyla. And look, this paradox is not just some boring technical talk. It is hiding a massive geopolitical plot, one that will cost you big if you do not catch on. And the real winners, pulling the strings? Well, they show up next. Now, let's really ground this paradox so it makes sense. You see, America is an absolute oil superpower. And yet, believe it or not, we are actually short on the fuel that we actually need to function. That massive contradiction all starts with how the system was built. Along the Gulf Coast, in cities like Houston and New Orleans, there are these massive refineries. These plants were designed decades ago with just one specific purpose in mind, and that was processing heavy, sour, crude oil. We are talking oil that is thick, high in sulfur. It is basically just liquid asphalt. And you see, that is exactly where Venezuela comes into the picture. They hold the largest reserves of heavy crude on the whole earth. Almost all of it concentrated right there in the Orinoco Belt. Now look, this was not an accident. Back when oil ruled geopolitics and Venezuela was America's top supplier, our entire refining system was optimized for that flow.
Heavy oil was cheap, it was abundant, and it was perfect for producing gasoline, diesel, and industrial fuels at a massive scale. But fast forward to today. Now, enter the shale boom. The U.S. is literally flooding the market with light, sweet crude. This is premium oil from places like the Permian Basin. It is cleaner. It is easier to refine. On paper, you see, it sounds like a dream. But structurally, the whole system breaks. Those refineries simply were not built for this. They can process light oil, sure, but just not efficiently.
It is a technical mismatch. They sputter, costs start to rise, and massive amounts of energy just get wasted. Without steady access to Venezuelan heavy crude, many of these massive plants now run at half capacity, sometimes even shutting down entire units.
That means less gasoline, less diesel, and ultimately, much higher prices for you at the pump. This is where the risk really compounds. The system is fragile. One single supply disruption can spike your fill up by another dollar overnight.
Yet you see, the illusion of choice masks the whole problem. Most people just assume all oil is the same, that it is interchangeable. Swap one barrel for another with no consequences? Well, that is false. We are locked into an outdated refinery network, built for a world that no longer exists.
Now, pause on this number for a second. America extracts ultra-clean light oil, yet 70% of Gulf Coast refineries cannot process it properly.
This mismatch alone costs billions of dollars every year, and has driven trucking costs up by 15%, squeezing every single corner of the economy. Now look, it is time we go even deeper into this mess, because this, right here, is where the numbers start really hurting your pocketbook. We have to start with diesel. Not gasoline, diesel. You see, that heavy Venezuelan crude, well, it isn't just oil in a generic sense. It is packed with these incredibly complex carbon chains. And believe it or not, that specific chemistry makes it the absolute gold standard for producing cheap diesel and jet fuel.
You remove that supply, and suddenly, refineries start to scramble. Efficiency drops like a stone, and diesel prices jump. Now, that jump right there, that is your primary inflation engine. And here's exactly why it hits you, directly in the face.
Diesel is what powers the trucks moving every single thing you buy. We are talking about your morning bread, your daily groceries, even that Amazon box sitting at your door right now. When diesel prices fall, because Maduro's oil is finally back in the system, trucking costs fall right along with it. Pennies come off every loaf of bread, every single gallon of milk. But you remove that supply, the math flips instantly. Trucking costs spike, and suddenly, your grocery bill rises by 5 to 10%. Now look, that isn't just theory, that is your actual receipt. Now let's zoom out. Before this arrest, nearly all of Venezuela's output was flowing straight to China and India. They moved it through ghost fleets, dodging sanctions, and selling it dirt cheap. We are talking about 303 billion barrels of oil. That is 17% of the entire world's proven reserves, just being dumped into the global market at a discount.
America's move turns this whole thing into a zero-sum game. We cut off that cash flow, we block our rivals, and we redirect that bargain energy back home where it belongs.
Pause on the scale for a second. 303 billion barrels. That is enough to power the entire United States for more than 50 years. That is not just symbolic, folks. That is absolute control. Now, it tightens even further. Look at CITGO. That is Venezuela's massive asset sitting right here on U.S. soil. A refining network with gas flowing all the way from Michigan to Miami. Meanwhile, Venezuela's own infrastructure is literally collapsing. Believe it or not, it needs at least $60 billion just to rebuild and get back online.
Enter U.S. policy. Trump greenlights giants like Chevron and Exxon. They step in, they rebuild, and they lock in that cheap Orinoco crude straight through U.S. refineries to your pump.
$60 billion isn't charity. You see, it is vertical control. From the source to the station, total dominance over gas prices. But wait, there's another layer. A quieter financial layer. Venezuelan bonds. They were defaulted, written off as total junk, and held by big players on Wall Street.
Post-arrest, those bonds are surging in value. Why? Because stability means repayment. And that money, it flows indirectly into U.S. pension funds, into your 401k. So the impact stacks up. Consumers see lower transport pressure, and small businesses avoid those massive trucking hikes that could easily wipe them out.
Compare that globally. Europe blends crude types flexibly, and Asia buys discounted supply. But America? We have been the overpaying sucker because of this technical mismatch. In this zero-sum showdown, the Maduro capture flips the entire board. The U.S. wins, China eats the loss. But hold on just a second, because the counter-argument is coming. Now, let's just slow things down for a minute and play devil's advocate. You see, because believe it or not everyone out there is celebrating the Maduro arrest. On paper, the critics actually have a case. They argue this whole thing was just a reckless power move, a case of direct interference in another country's affairs. In theory, you see, it invites retaliation. China could strike back with massive trade pressure, or OPEC could suddenly tighten the supply.
Suddenly, global oil prices spike, diesel climbs, and inflation bites even harder. That is the argument. Short-term gains, but long-term chaos for ordinary Americans.
It sounds reasonable, doesn't it? Well, for a moment. But then, you see, the numbers finally land. Start with the crude itself. Venezuelan heavy oil is 30% cheaper than comparable supply from the Middle East or Canada. Without it, U.S. refiners are already overpaying. And look, that cost doesn't just stay on a balance sheet. It shows up right there in your daily prices. Now consider CITGO operating right here on U.S. soil. Over the past decade, it has saved American refiners more than $10 billion just by processing oil that actually fits their systems.
Arresting Maduro does not destabilize that flow. Believe it or not, it stabilizes it. Now get ready for the quiet shock: the bonds. Venezuelan debt was written off as junk. It was defaulted. It was toxic. But after the arrest, those bonds jumped 200% overnight.
That surge, it is a bet on repayment under a friendlier regime. And get this, it didn't require a tax hike or new spending, but it did lift portfolios tied to your pensions and 401k-YS.
So when you stack the warnings against the actual data, the counter-argument collapses. The numbers do not point to chaos. They point to cost control and supply stability. But look, knowing the truth is not enough. Understanding the system does not automatically protect your wallet. What matters next is whether you know how to move inside it.
You need a plan before the next shock hits. And that roadmap, well, that is exactly what we are laying out in the final wrap-up right now. So, let's take a second to reframe everything you just watched. You see, the problem, it was never that people didn't care enough. No, it's that the system was built so you wouldn't even notice until the cost finally hit your own wallet. Look, this wasn't just about one single arrest. It was about how energy, finance, and politics quietly decide exactly what you're paying every single week.
Now, here's where the control actually comes back to you.
First, you've got to stay alert to the signals, not just the headlines. Track the inputs, things like heavy crude flows, refinery capacity, and those sudden policy shifts. Believe it or not, when those gears move, the prices follow. Always. Second, you need to position yourself, even in small ways. Not by guessing markets, but by understanding which sectors benefit when the system resets, and which ones quietly pass costs downstream to you.
Third, don't stay silent. Pressure works when it's focused. History proves it. Price caps, transparency rules, supply reforms. They didn't happen because leaders felt generous. No, they happened because enough people were paying attention.
You're not alone in this, but you're also not just a bystander.
Staying subscribed isn't just about supporting channel. It's about staying informed before the next big shift catches you off guard.
Share this if it helped you see the system more clearly. Comment if you felt the impact in real life, because patterns show up much faster when people compare notes. And remember this going forward. If you understand the system, you stop being its easiest target.